You speak of political pressure. I mean, it's part of the reason why the Israelis aren't confident that Trump would respond to so-called political pressure, because of the polls we're seeing that show an unprecedented number of Americans unsympathetic to Israel.
I don't think necessarily Trump cares that much about that per se, but I think he cares about the fact that his base and what he's been talking about for some time, whether one believes him or not, is that he's presented himself as the anti-war candidate. And in my view, he's managed to get that largely because big parts of the left abandoned that space. He was talking about how he wanted killing to end in Gaza during the campaign. And Kamala Harris responded by saying, "I want to have the most lethal military in the world." If the left, or at least the Democrats, had actually retained that space, I think we would perhaps be in a different position. But nevertheless, his base right now feels very strongly about this. Key people in the Republican Party who are, at the end of the day, very influential with his base, such as Tucker Carlson, have just gone further and further in the direction of completely opposing a war with Iran for a variety of different reasons. I think it would be very difficult for Trump to decide to go in that direction unless he had some very, very convincing reasons, such as the Iranians attacking the US or something like that. Short of that, I cannot see his base going along with him on that. And given many of the things that he has done, including tariffs, and et cetera, that have hurt his own base, I think that actually further limits his maneuverability. His margins of error are smaller in that sense. This is part of the reason why the Israelis were working on a very short timeline. They knew that at some point, the margins for Trump would be so narrow that he would not be willing to take the risk of a military campaign. And that's why they've been pushing so aggressively to do it as soon as possible. But so far, they seem to have lost that fight.
It's kind of fascinating. I mean, this is a bit of an aside, but what you're describing to me is the Republican Party, Donald Trump specifically, responding to the idea that his base, that voters will no longer support him, that the Republican Party would lose power, lose elections, lose influence, and calibrating his foreign policy to prevent that from happening. Which I gotta say, democracy in action is not something, is not a dynamic that I'm used to on the left side of the aisle. As evidence, at least for the last couple of years. I mean, even your sort of description of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's unwillingness to break at all with the policy on Gaza, whereas Donald Trump at least was willing to pay some lip service to a ceasefire, is illustrative of that, and that Biden and Harris were willing to lose the election over not moving an inch on that particular position.
Yeah, no, I think one has to frankly be blind not to see that that is the reality. I think a lot of people are uncomfortable on the Democratic side that has been the reality. I'm just not seeing enough from their end to do something about that, because that is the reality at this point. And as you pointed out, one thing I would perhaps differ a little bit, and I don't know if you meant it that way, but he didn't just pay lip service to ceasefire. It is because of the pressure that Witkoff put on Netanyahu that ultimately Netanyahu agreed to a ceasefire. It was not thanks to McGurk or to Biden, at least not to the people involved in the negotiations that I have spoken to. And what I think is utterly disappointing, of course, is that, sorry, to a certain extent, the Trump administration on this issue have gravitated back to where Biden was, which is they did a ceasefire, but then the Israelis broke it. And instead of blaming the Israelis for breaking it, they blamed Hamas. And then we started to see that pattern again. I think it's very crucial for them to get back to where this is supposed to be. But I'm not holding my breath that they will go there. But at least in the beginning, they did way more than Biden did in his last year and a half on this issue.
Pivoting for a second to the issue of Israel-Gaza, I mean, there was this incredible sort of spate of articles about how Israel basically admitted that we can't complete a hostage exchange because the condition that Hamas wants for this hostage exchange is to end the war, and we don't want to end the war, which in the wake of over a year of claims that this is all about the hostages and anybody who offers any support for the people of Palestine is indifferent to the interests of hostages. You know, not that we really need mask off moments at this point, but is an incredible mask off moment. What has been your perception of the response of the American government to the basically evaporation of the pretext for why it is that they're not backing an enduring ceasefire?
Frankly, hardly anything. And I think that's highly problematic. And I'll be frank, I don't think it would have been particularly different if Biden was in power right now, because we have plenty of experience. I mean, the difference we're seeing here is that the Biden administration pretended to be really upset about this, and they kept on doing these leaks about how angry Biden is
Right.
privately on these issues. And I think there was some pressure that they put on Netanyahu when it came to certain elements of escalation, such as the exchanges of fire between Iran and Israel. But on this issue, they exerted almost zero pressure. And even some of the cases, such as the delaying of some ammunition deliveries, which, first of all, is no big deal in the first place. Either you stop it or you don't. But even those delays were actually not because of political reasons, it was because of logistical reasons. So we didn't see anything there. And now we're not seeing anything either. The difference is that the Israelis have stopped pretending and the US government has stopped pretending. So I think the direction of this continues to be very disastrous. I personally think that the Trump administration should take this much more seriously. And the reason I say is this. I think the Trump administration is serious about leaving the Middle East militarily. I think this has been a continuous theme of them wanting to reduce troop level there. We're actually seeing them withdrawing from Syria, although they're not making much fuss of it. I expect that you will see withdrawals from Iraq as well. But if you actually want to have a sustainable withdrawal from the Middle East military, which I would support 100%, I think that's absolutely the right direction to go. We should not have 19 bases in the Middle East. We should not have 50,000 troops there. If you want to do that in a sustainable way, it helps dramatically if you also then work with the readiness that exists in the region right now to create a security architecture for the region with a regional organization on top of it. This is one of those things that existed in Europe, exists in Asia, has never existed in the Middle East. And because the reason is you want to be able to burden shift the security burden onto regional players. The regional players need that type of a security architecture to be able to absorb the burden that will fall on their shoulders. So you need to take that step. For that step to be sustainable, however, you need to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian issue, or at least make significant movement and progress towards a real Palestinian state. Otherwise, that instability will continue to spread. It will undermine the security architecture. And guess what? Whenever bad things happen there, we have proven ourselves to be very incapable of resisting the pressure or temptation to go back into the Middle East. So if you want to really reduce the troop levels, bring American troops home in a sustainable way, you need to address some of these issues. Instead of what is happening right now, which is essentially greenlighting the Israelis annexing all of the West Bank, all of Gaza, big parts of Syria, big parts of Lebanon, all that will do is bring about more war, more instability, and all that will do is to bring the United States back into the region in a way that we do not want.
I mean, I find myself almost, speechless at where to even begin with the idea of a Palestinian state at this juncture. I mean, is the Trump administration even still parroting the kind of two-state solution narrative that has been, I guess, the U.S. foreign policy stance since time immemorial? Are we even still doing that?
Let's be clear. It's been the U.S. foreign policy pretense for the last couple of years, for the last 8 or so years. And it was pretty much a pretense for a period prior to that. There was a period in which we were somewhat serious about it. We abandoned it a long time ago. The pretense is not completely gone. First of all, it was gone on the Trump one because he did the Abraham Accord, which deliberately threw the Palestinian issue under the bus, the Palestinians under the bus, in order to just get some of these normalization agreements. As Kushner himself described, Jared Kushner at the time, we're moving beyond the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, not resolving it, not a state solution. But then on the Biden as well, it was just crystal clear. It was just empty words. At the end of the day, they were seeing clearly what the Israelis were doing in the West Bank and elsewhere. So it's been a pretense. In some ways, it's actually good to get the pretense out of the way and stop pretending. But it does have significant implications. Take a look at the G7 statement from the last meeting that Biden was in to the first meeting of Trump. I don't remember exact verbiage, but it was something along the lines of a two-state solution in the last meeting that Biden was chairing or was part of. it has now been watered down to a horizon, a political horizon for the Palestinians. What on earth does that even mean?
What does that mean?
No one knows. It's just empty words. But the pretense is gone. And even though that is terrible in some ways because of what's happening on the ground, that was happening on the ground long before the pretense was taken away. The pretense being away, though, however, may actually generate greater pressure from elsewhere that we have to do something about this issue. We have to get this resolved. We cannot have this situation continue in this way. Not pursuing a two-state solution leads exactly to where we are right now. More violence, whether it's from October 7th or to all of the stuff and the war crimes the Israelis have committed ever since. Right now, you just don't have much political power and will in the international system. Europe is completely self-absorbed with the hole they dug themselves into when it comes to an uncompromising position on Ukraine. The rest of the world is really terrified what kind of tariffs they're going to be faced with from Trump. So I'm not seeing a tremendous amount of political will from elsewhere to do something about this in the short term, which is obviously very, very problematic. In the longer term, however, if we manage to get through the short term, I think it's actually a good thing if the pretense is gone. Imagine if the pretense was gone 15 years ago. By now, we would have probably done something about this. The pretense has enabled a horrible status quo to remain in place.
Done something about it. Done something about it, like what, Trita? Like in the absence of a two-state solution, just doing something about it.
It's not about not going for a two-state solution. It's about the pretense that what we are doing is in support of a two-state solution. I firmly believe that we need to have a two-state solution. It should not be based on Oslo or that type of a negotiation between the two parties. We developed some proposals on this. You can find it at our Better Order Project report, betterorderproject.org. What we're calling for essentially is that, look, you can't have Oslo, these incremental steps without a clear definition of what the end goal is. Nor can you expect that a Palestinian state can be created through negotiations between the two parties. Israel itself was created through an imposed solution from the outside. Same thing is going to have to happen with the creation of a Palestinian state. It has to be imposed from the outside because the Israelis are not just going to, out of the goodness of the heart, agree to something. Nor is a negotiation between a party that is arguably engaged in a genocide with the party that is being genocided going to lead to anywhere. The power discrepancy is just too significant. And there needs to be real consequences if the Israelis don't go along with this. So we need to have arms embargo on these different measures if it doesn't go that way. But there is a plus side as well for the Israelis. What we are arguing for in the Better Order Project is that this should be combined with the establishment of a security architecture for the region. And that security architecture has to be all-inclusive, and it has to include Israel, but only once Israel has also enabled a Palestinian state to exist. So the entry ticket for the Israelis into the security integration into the region is for them to also allow the Palestinians to have their own state. That is a bigger offer to the Israelis than anything else that has been put on the table. The 2002 proposal put forward by the Arab states said that all of them would recognize Israel in return for recognition of a Palestinian state. The Abraham Accords would normalize relations. This is about the security integration of Israel into the region, but on the condition that there also has to be a Palestinian state.
The way we talk about Israel and its influence in American politics, sometimes it feels like it's irrational. Its influence feels irrational. Its power feels irrational. It makes one ask questions about the source of the power and, Epstein and blackmail and Mossad. And people just are trying to figure out why it is that all of these American leaders, we talk about Biden was ideologically aligned to being more conciliatory with Netanyahu. Obama didn't want to pick the fight, and yet here he is in fisticuffs. Donald Trump is willing to stand up to him more, but is willing to let him genocide all of Gaza as, penance for not letting him bomb Iran. Like, the way we describe these relationships with Israel as everyone having to get entangled with these folks as opposed to just ignoring them or telling them what to do is wild. So then I guess my question is, if it does exert this power and influence and has been such a thorn in the side of so many American leaders, even as they bend the knee for whatever reason to Israel, why would Israel submit to a Palestinian state? What is so attractive about these security guarantees being integrated into this security relationship, as opposed to the normalization, et cetera, that has been on the table before? It does seem like the true goal of Israel is simply eliminating the existence of Palestinians. I don't know how else to put that.
I think, first of all, several people in the current Israeli government would probably agree 100% with the last part that you said, that the goal has nothing to do with security integration. They clearly don't seem to be particularly attracted to normalization with Saudi Arabia any longer, whereas 4 years ago, that seemed to have been a key objective of theirs. If they are in a position to choose between Eretz Israel, the greater Israel that is occupying large parts of the other country's territory, and get away with it, and integration with security-wise in the region, they seem to clearly favor the former. That is not necessarily all Israelis, though. And the other scenario that one has to take into account is, as we are proposing it, the security architecture should not wait for the Israelis. It should go forward right now. The openness in the region to do this has been greater than I've ever seen before. So they should do it. And then the question is Israel going to be completely alone outside of this? Because that is going to create a security architecture for everyone else to be part of. And that's going to isolate the Israelis. But there's going to be an offer on the table. And the question is, can that potentially change up the domestic politics of Israel to a certain extent? Not in the sense of causing the fall of the government, as the Biden administration tried to do with the Abraham Accord expansion, but in the sense of putting in an alternative vision in front of them for them to choose from or choose against at the end of the day. In some ways, it's calling a bluff, if it is a bluff. If we go with the reasoning that you have, which is that ultimately they don't care about security, they just care about expanding the territory. Well, it will be called through the bluff because this goes much further than in actually providing security than anything else that has been put on the table.
I feel like I have to put out there that there are people who obviously were never supportive of the two-state solution, believe that it was a pretense from the jump, and that also for sort of ideological reasons, the goal should be one state with equal rights for all. And of course, there's a debate about some folks who say just Israeli society will never tolerate that, and they see the one-state solution as incredible as the two-state solution would be. Can you help us understand why your position is for the two-state rather than the one?
So I think that's a very important question. But I would have to say, and we have people in the team that were in some ways more leaning towards one state. And when I say team, we had 130 scholars, former officials, foreign ministers, defense ministers, UN ambassadors from 40 countries, with a particular focus on Global South in this project. And the project was not just about this issue. It was about coming up with detailed reforms to the global security architecture as the world transitions away from unipolarity. And we had 20 detailed proposals along 7 variables. This is just one of them. The issue is, after October 7th and after what Israel has done to Gaza, to the West Bank, Lebanon, its occupation of Syria now, yes, one can make the argument that we are further away from a two-state solution than we have been in a very long time. And I think that would be absolutely correct. But it seems to me that we're even further away from anyone from either side actually wanting to live in a one-state solution. I have no particular preference for either side at this point. If the Israelis and the Palestinians want to live in a one state, who am I or the Quincy Institute or our project to say no to that? Absolutely. If that's what they want to do and there's a pathway for them to go there and it helps stabilize things in the region, it makes both peoples happy, that would be fantastic. It's just that our assessment is that as difficult as a two-state solution is, and it is definitely very difficult, a one-state solution after all of the violence and the cruelty that we have seen is far, far more difficult.
I mean, can you play that out just a little bit? Difficult because why? Because if Israel were required to grant Palestinians a right to return, because what? There would
No,
be.
no, not because of that. I would say that in the sense that that the two sides would actually want to live together in one state and not separate from each other after all of that has happened in the last 2 years.
I guess my pushback against that is it does. Well, let me ask it this way. Do you feel it's that Palestinians would be unwilling to move to whatever we're calling this new greater Israel Palestine and have equal rights under the law and equal protections under the law, or that there would be pushback violence from Israelis, the likes of which we've obviously been seeing in the West Bank, and toward Arabs living in Israel again for a very long time?
My sense is that it's actually from both sides. I mean, if you are a Palestinian, would you want to live in a state with Israelis at this point?
Well, as opposed to living in an open air prison and getting bombed to smithereens and having food and aid blockades. Yeah, if I were allowed to, I mean, isn't that, I mean, that's what's
Well, no, you're
kind
comparing,
of,
you're comparing, that's not really what the question is though, right, Rihanna?
you're
Because
saying
we're
the
comparing
two
a one
state,
state and two state. Yeah. I mean,
right? But the
compared
second
to
state
the
is,
hell that they're living right now, anything I'm sure would be better. The question is between a two state and a one state. Let's say that both of them were politically feasible. Given the horrors that has been experienced, do you think that there is a stronger desire on both sides or on any side for coexistence within a state? The very belief that coexistence is possible within one state together. And again, I have to say, from my standpoint, if that is the path that they would prefer, no one should stand in their way. I just don't see the desire for that, the support for that having increased. I think there's a lot of challenges with this two state, and a lot of it is because people believe that there's only one way of doing two states and that it is Oslo, it's incremental, all of these small steps that eventually led nowhere. I agree 100%. The process of that was disastrous, should never be repeated. It needs to be flipped on its head. It should not be a negotiation between the two sides when one side is holding all the cards. I agree with that 100%, but that is separate as to whether a two state is preferable to a one state.
I'm going to make a moral argument and not a political argument, and I fully accept that this may be naive. But I think what is sort of bothering me is the presumption that two peoples, because of acrimony, is not a word that does it justice, right? The presumption is that a blood feud is so deep and so intractable that it can only be satisfied by partition. There's something that doesn't quite sit well with me, that's kind of a presumption one should buy into, even if it's like a geopolitical reality. And I say that, I got to say, as a Black American, I'm thinking about the Civil War. I'm thinking about the question of whether or not, one could very easily argue, and people did argue, that we can't free the slaves because after basically what we've done to them, it will never be safe to live around them. Of course, they're going to want to kill us. Of course, they're going to exact retribution. And maybe this example actually proves your point, given the persistent problems of racial integration in the United States of America. But certainly, we at least presume that the answer to whatever continued inequities is not physical partition of Black people and white people, at least for now. We'll see what the Trump administration does with this 14th Amendment, LOL. But you see what I'm getting at, that these are not novel arguments between.
Yeah. From a moral standpoint, the idea that we have to accept that separation is the only option. I totally understand that. And again, I want to emphasize again, if a situation suddenly emerges that points to a stronger desire on both sides for a one-state solution, we're delighted. I have no preference one way or another. But I personally don't see that. I see that as less likely, even though even a two-state is extremely, extremely difficult to get, given the massive amount of deliberate settlements that the Israelis have built for the very purpose of making a Palestinian state non-viable, and the pressures that need to be put on in order to uproot those, as it was done in Gaza earlier on. It's going to be extremely difficult. But I think, at least as things stand right now, a one state is even more difficult.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.